When something ends at eclipse time, it's final, it's finished, there's no going back. Another interesting thing about the eclipses is that there's something really divine, and a lot of souls choose to exit the planet at this time. Because it is abrupt ending, sometimes it feels unexpected to us, but for the most part, it is something that a soul has chosen. Remember that the full moon always brings the culmination, always brings the light to the situation that we can't see. The solar eclipse is still hidden. The solar eclipse on the 12th of August is the hidden stuff that's starting to surface. And the full moon brings the light to it. It shines the light to it. So anything dark and unseen and very shadowy at the time of the eclipse on the 12th of August, we will know a lot more about it. We'll have a lot more clarity about it by the time the 28th of August arrives with its full moon, that lunar eclipse in Pisces at 4 degrees. We must remember that when we are looking at these kind of planetary motions, we're always going to refer them back to your natal chart, your progressed moon chart, and see what planets do you have in those degrees that could be possibly making aspects. That'll give us an idea about what's happening in your life. So, reminder, the solar eclipse is on the 12th of August, and that is at 20 degrees of Leo. So we're looking at any planets in your chart that are at 20 degrees of Leo, so we can see what the aspect is. Same with the lunar eclipse, which takes place on the 28th of August, and it is at 4 degrees of Pisces. Obviously, because it is the moon that is involved here, the eclipses involve everybody. No one is exempt from experiencing what the eclipse is bringing. The eclipses always deliver something very surprisingly. It's very abrupt, it's very sudden, like I've said. But I like to look at them with the aspects that they are bringing in on the same day. Also, I want to remind you that the solar eclipse is masculine, usually quite aggressive energy. The full moon is always very feminine. So it's all about our emotions and how we are reacting. Because it's in Pisces, this full moon on the 28th of August, and it's 4 degrees of Pisces, it's the beginning degrees of Pisces. So we really need to use our awareness. We must practice awareness. It's all good and well that you have these really big feelings, but the real self-mastery question is, how do you respond? How do you behave? How are you choosing to act with these feelings? That's the most important thing. So we're dealing with a polarity because the sun and the moon are in opposition. What do we know about oppositions? They bring endings, they bring separation, and it's the moon versus the sun. So how we feel versus our egoic logic thinking, or how we feel versus our ego anyway. There is a contrast. There is something happening that is making us feel pushed and pulled in some direction. So again, we're looking at where these eclipses are taking place in your chart. Also, we're going to look at the Sun and Mercury, which is forming a very challenging aspect to Uranus. So this is sudden conversations or a change in how the conversation goes. And with the Sun there as well, we need to use our awareness and make sure that our ego is not sitting in its rightness, wanting to be right. Let's listen. Mercury says, let's listen. Uranus is saying, I'm going to bring this to you whether you're ready or not. We need to practice the mastery of how we respond to these kind of conversations. My advice is take a moment, think about it, reflect on it before you react. Rather respond from a place that is not fearful. Rather respond from a place that comes from a place of love within you. We're also looking at the Sun and Mercury, which are opposing Neptune. So this is about stories that you hear, conversations that come up that might not necessarily be true. Neptune dissolves or brings the illusion of something. So the eclipse reminds us not to believe everything that we hear. There is still a harmonious sextile between Pluto in Aquarius and Neptune in Aries. And so these two are saying, you know, we can still find ways to bring balance into our space, into our life, depending on where these planets are in your chart. That's the area that we're focusing on. Of course, Mars and Pluto are still out of bounds and still behaving erratically. And with the eclipse season upon us, it's really important to keep your wits about you, have your awareness around you. Don't go into situations blindly. You know, if you're driving around or you're, you know, out in public spaces, keep your awareness around you, have your eyes around you so that you can see what's going on. You don't want to be caught up in silly situations, just like silly conversations that shouldn't be taking place. It's also events and actions that take place over this time. Remember, the solar eclipse is aggressive, the lunar eclipse is very emotional. One of the most demanding aspects is that Sun-Mars square. Mars is all about action and it wants it now. And I beg your pardon, it's the Mars-Saturn square. Mars is about action, it wants it now, and Saturn is more about the long term. It's saying, no, what are we going to create for the long term? So it's saying, Saturn is saying to Mars, I would rather be in action of something that's going to last a really long time. Saturn is about structure, it's about discipline. Mars can be a little bit erratic and aggressive. So again, here, there might be frustration that arises. You might get really angry very suddenly. The idea is, how are you going to respond to this? Whatever comes up for you, how are you choosing to respond? And of course, where this Saturn and Mars aspect is in your chart, where is it going through your chart so that you can understand better? You'll know what's happening in your space because by now lots of stuff has started to surface. You will know instinctively, if you just trust that process, you'll know instinctively that things are being brought to your attention for a specific reason, either to end it or to allow it to finalize, accept it, and be able to move on or change direction if that's the case. We have an interesting influence between the vertex and Pallas Athene. It symbolizes encounters, like special meetings, special encounters that take place. And Pallas Athene is about using strategic methods. It's about being, you know, the one who breaks out of the mold in terms of the warrior and what you are fighting for that you want. So interesting to see how that plays out in your chart as well. And then, of course, Vesta in Aries is a little bit challenging with Juno in Capricorn. So, you know, where are we feeling challenged in our one-on-one relationships? How are we relating to other people? It might feel like our sense of purpose is highlighted here, can be a little bit challenging. And then we have Ceres, the Sun, and Mercury, and that kind of also supports us. What the beautiful thing about astrology is you might find that there are challenges in some areas of your chart, but in other areas of the chart, we can look for the resolution, we can look for the solutions. And this is one of them. It's saying, I need to find that place where my self-esteem can grow. I need to find that place where I can think out of the box, I beg your pardon, share ideas that are more harmonious and more in service to something that is purposeful and meaningful in my life. We need to also remember that the Sun with the Mercury aspect can also bring about a very egotistical type of I am right and everybody else is the idiot. So we need to be very cautious of that. There is also a lot of emphasis in having a lot of clarity at that moment and therefore knowing that I'm very right. But you've got to remember that your right and my right are not the same. This is what you see, this is what I see. It's never going to be the same. I can't expect you to see my side. Okay? All in all, I feel like the lunar eclipse is more about the revelation. It's more about, what we're seeing as truth, finally, the truth does come out. So where in your life have you been sitting with the disillusionment or the illusion, rather, of reality? Whether it's a relationship and suddenly you see the truth and now you've got to make a decision about what you're going to do about this relationship, or a business deal, or a client. Eclipses can either eclipse females or males in, or they will eclipse females or males out of your life. That's also an interesting aspect of a eclipse. This is definitely a time of old emotional patterns being resurfacing, and now we're going to do the healing. Now it's about realizing that we're all adults and dealing with situations in an adult way. The moon in Pisces also reminds us to surrender our need for control. The moon in Pisces is very sensitive. The moon in Pisces is also about our psychic ability. You might be having some really vivid dreams. You might find that your psychic capacity is elevated and you feel more, you see more. And also just a reminder, not everything you think and everything you feel are in fact facts. So be cautious about that as well. A full moon and a new moon, when it's an eclipse time, is supercharged. So it does feel more intense than it actually is. I would also like to remind you that we have choices in life. The choice is always whether we're going to climb onto the fear tree or if we're going to climb onto the love tree. And the fear tree is where all the nonsense sits, where all the storytelling is, what your ego tells you. The love tree is where we find our equilibrium, where we find our momentum, where we found love and forgiveness and acceptance and joy, and we're always in between those. We're either here or we're there. We're human, so we can't be on both at the same time. And this is a really good time to choose consciously, make choices consciously as the eclipse brings you the truth. Whatever that truth may be, use your awareness to make choices that are conscious, instead of just being on autopilot and just reacting to every situation and every person that comes out. I usually call this time the Looney Tunes times, because everybody loses their goodness. So a reminder again, solar eclipse 12th of August, 20 degrees of Leo. Where's that in your chart? Lunar eclipse 28th of August, 4 degrees of Pisces. Where is that in your chart? It is definitely going to affect you because the moon moves so quickly. It does almost a degree and a half a day. So this eclipse does affect us all. It just elevates that abruptness or that ending if you have planets in your chart that are at 20 degrees or 4 degrees, because that's more impactful. I do wish that this lunar eclipse brings you the light that you have been looking for, the truth that you have been looking for, because the truth always finds us. You don't really have to look for it. And I also wish you a glorious Women's Day today. I know in South Africa it is celebrated International Women's Day. I'm not sure. I think it's March, usually international, but 9th of August is in South Africa. So I wish all the women in South Africa a very happy Women's Day, and we know that we are celebrated daily. We don't really need just a day to prove that, but it is a nice day to take off and maybe receive some flowers, chocolates, or breakfast in bed. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for watching All Things Moons and Stars, and we will chat soon. Bye-bye for now.